Welcome, my friends, to another edition of More Bad News, brought to you, as always, by Camel Cigarettes. Take the Camel's Challenge, smoke Camels for 30 days, and see for yourself what a difference Camels can make in your life. Well, my friends, last week we observed the fast of Tisha B'Av, the most depressing day in Jewish history. It was on this day that both the First and the Second Temples were destroyed. The Spanish Inquisition and World War I both began on Tisha B'Av. In general, it's a good idea to hunker down and fast until the end of the day. If you're Jewish, this is just not a good day. The earliest event cited in the Mishnah as occurring on Tisha B'Av took place when the Israelites were waiting to cross over into the Promised Land. The 12 spies had just come back from spying out the land, and they returned with dire predictions. The people began to weep, and since God had already promised them the land, he was angered by their lack of faith. As a punishment for their lack of faith, God on Tisha B'Av, God condemned them to 40 years of wandering in the desert. In effect, God said, if you're going to cry for nothing, I'll give you something to cry about. Until the end of time, actually. After redemption, Tisha B'Av will become a festive holiday, and some radical communist groups, seeing redemption at hand, have turned Tisha B'Av into a time for gala parties and celebrations. I think there's some of those things still go on today, but they certainly were at the turn of the century and afterwards with the radical Haskalah movement. One has to wonder at a God so vindictive that he would bring endless suffering to his people who worship him. I use the male designation because I think it's appropriate here. This is a punishing patriarchal God, not a nurturing, loving matriarchal God. And what does it say about theodicy, about the idea of justice? Where is justice on Tisha B'Av? Well, my friends, this week's Science magazine has I told you I like to get my bad news from science. This week's Science magazine carried a couple of interesting items that I wanted to share. The first is a story about an internationally renowned scholar, Francesca Gino, whose allocate-studied career has focused on dishonesty and how people justify immoral behavior. She holds a very prestigious chair at the Harvard Business School, and the first thing that her wiki page says about her right now is currently on leave due to accusations of academic fraud. It was only last month that data sleuths published a series of blog posts detailing evidence of fraud in her work. That apparently opened the floodgates. She reminds me of Cyril Burt, who was knighted for his twin studies which proved beyond a reasonable doubt the importance of genetics and intelligence. The entire British public education system was shaped by his theories. Burt died in 1971, probably England's most famous psychologist. Then in 1974, Leon Kamen, an American psychologist and psychometrician, published The Science and Politics of IQ, in which he showed beyond any doubt that Cyril Burt's twin studies were fraudulent. In the end, it turned out that many people knew that Burt was a charlatan. He would often publish phony letters in his journals that he edited, letters that supposedly came from admirers. He even made up an assistant, a woman who never existed. There must have been many people who simply didn't want to embarrass or challenge him because of his powerful position in academia. The same was true of Arthur Jensen, who argued in the Harvard Educational Review article in 1969, how much can we boost IQ and achievement, that Head Start programs for Black children would do nothing to boost their IQ. When my friend Peter Scheinemann tried to publish an article demonstrating that Jensen's math didn't add up, he found obstacles at every turn. The major psychology journal magazines told him that he should be publishing this in a psychometric journal. And the editors of the psychometric journal said that it should be published in a psychology journal. No one wanted to publish it. I was finally able to help him get it published as Better Never Than Late, Peer Review and the Preservation of Prejudice in 2001. At the time of the publication of of Jensen's original article, in 1969 piece, I was teaching in Spanish Harlem, taking care of children, and we were feeding them breakfast. And it just offended me to no end that he was arguing that feeding these children breakfast won't improve their IQ. It doesn't pay to feed the children breakfast. I found this throughout my career. Prejudice has a way of stubbornly resisting facts. If you want to believe blacks are inferior, no amount of evidence will convince you otherwise. And there is a mountain of respectable academic work that will support your prejudice. There's another article in this Science that I wanted to briefly mention. It's titled Prospects of Unregulated Deep Sea Mining Loom. The article explains that we are about to set off mining the bottom of the ocean from Hawaii to Mexico. It turns out that the seafloor contains deposits of cobalt and nickel, which we need to build our electric cars. The only problem is that it will destroy an entire ecosystem and drive unknown numbers of deep sea creatures into extinction. Out of sight, out of mind. It's another example of how the solution to the climate crisis is to destroy an entire ecosystem. I would like to take a few moments to explain what it is I think I'm doing with these videos. First, I have no illusions about my show going viral or even gaining some kind of an audience. I mean, I have a small audience that doesn't grow really. In fact, it shrinks a little bit every, monthly, I don't know, holding its own. But while not impossible for me to grow an audience, I very much doubt that I will ever have another viral moment that I had with my 14-minute video, which was titled Week 1 General Introduction. It was released as an unpublished video, which meant that the only way you could see this video was if you had the URL. You couldn't search for it, and it wouldn't just pop up in your feed. It was strictly meant as an introduction to my courses that I published on January 9th, 2022, just over a year and a half ago. I remember sending it out on a Sunday evening and finding to my amazement that the next morning I had 10,000 views. That meant that the original 100 or so students who had the URL had shared the URL with others who shared it with others, and before you know it, it was going all over the place. It has been viewed now over 580,000 times on my YouTube channel. But there were several million views when you looked at the news media and the edited versions and that circulated on TikTok. One professor played the entire 14 minutes with a commentary. And I recall that had over 10,000 views. And I received hundreds of letters and emails praising the video and supporting me in my challenge to the university. I heard from students who had taken courses of mine over 20, 25 years ago and could still vividly remember my teaching style. But I wouldn't want that kind of attention again. It was very stressful. I would prefer to stay out of the courtroom and out of the spotlight. I really am enjoying the quiet that I have in life now. And I'm very happy being insignificant. I really don't matter much any longer, and I don't mind that. I'm not in the midst of a great struggle against racism or fascism. So what am I doing? Well, primarily I'm entertaining myself. I keep a journal. I've kept journals for decades, and I don't do it with the idea that in the back of my mind that someday my journals will be published and graduate students will pore over every scrap of paper as they do, for example, for Martin Heidegger, whose massive private journal notes, including his notorious Black books, which preserved all of his fawning love for Hitler and fascism until his death. It turns out that he went to his grave an unrepentant Nazi, the leading philosopher of the 20th century. So I don't think that I'm setting the world aright or explaining things that no one else understands. If you have been watching my weekly shows, they are above all amateurish, filled with little errors. They are not very polished in any way, and I make no attempt to edit my videos. They're usually done in one take. And I think a few weeks ago, I referred to La Nina, referred to the El Nino as La Nina, it got me confused. The next week, I corrected myself. So take what I say with a grain of salt. I used to say to my students that half the time I didn't know what I was talking about, and the other half the time I was lying. What I meant to say to them was, don't take anything I have to say as truth. I don't speak truth. I just try to demonstrate how I think. And most of my teaching has focused on trying to encourage students to think for themselves. I never wanted my students to agree with me. I wasn't trying to convince them that I was right and they were wrong. My views of reality are not for anyone else. A hydrogen atom is composed of a nucleus and one electron. The nucleus is composed of a proton and a neutron. The proton is composed of 3 quarks, 2 up quarks, which have a positive charge, and a down quark, which has a negative charge. But the 3 quarks represent only 1% of the mass of the proton. 99% of the mass of the proton comes from the gluons, which carry the strong nuclear force and bind the quarks together. Now, for most people, understanding the structure of the proton is of no importance. But more importantly, what I understand of the structure of the proton is only relevant to me. It's part of my consciousness of how I understand reality. So these videos are a glimpse into how I see reality. I create them in the same spirit that I keep my journals. It is how I keep track of the evolution of my own thought. I don't have much time left. I don't think any of us do. Emanuel Ringelblum has left us his diary of life in the Warsaw Ghetto as it was collapsing around him. This is pretty much what I'm doing, recording my life week by week on a planet in the midst of mass extinction. The difference between my diary and Ringelblum's is that Ringelblum hoped that someday the work of the Onyx Shabbat project would be useful to the world that had survived the Nazis. He believed that someday the Nazis would be defeated. I have no such hope. The Nazis will be with us right up to the end of civilization. My only goal in doing these programs is to urge you to take the Camel's Challenge. Listen, my friends, we're all going to die. You don't want to die without having experienced what camels can do for you. So take the Camel's Challenge, smoke camels for 30 days, and see what camels can do for you. That's it for this week. Be safe, be well, and I will be back next week with, unfortunately, more bad news.